basically, for those who don't know too much about the MH370 flight, so basically 10 years ago, a Boeing 777 aircraft that was carrying 227 passengers and 12 crew members from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing when it deviated from its planned route and disappeared from radar over the Indian Ocean. So it was huge news. Basically, every country in the area was searching for it. The main wreckage has never really been found. The key events in the flight were that the plane's transponder and communication systems were disabled shortly after takeoff, and it made unexplained turn westward across the Malay Peninsula and continued flying for several hours before running out of fuel and crashing into wherever it crashed. The southern Indian Ocean is what the official story thinks it all ended up. But from these videos you see, and watching them, I'm sort of with the whistleblowers recently in Congress, with sort of the sort of mainstream acceptance of UFOs existing, with all the technologies that's came out. I think the reason why this wasn't as palatable back in 2014 when these videos surfaced showing basically these orbs rotating around a plane, and then in a blink of an eye, they all disappear. I think, it was almost too unbelievable for anyone to take it mainstream. But now 10 years later, after all we've seen and all the evidence that's been displayed, members of Congress being briefed upon these, UAPs, UFOs that are moving in ways that defy physics, with zero propulsion systems going underwater, making pilots who are relaying back that they're seeing some things moving in extraordinary ways. That has now been mainstream since we saw the videos originally in 2014. Now, let's say, what would these UAPs or UFOs want with this plane? Why would they be disappearing this random flight that was going to Beijing? What would the U.S. government motivations to be covering this all up? There's even some pretty interesting foreign policy exchanges with Malaysia and the United States directly following this disappearance. The silencing of some Malaysian politicians regarding their suspicions. There's a lot to this case that wasn't brought up in 2014. And looking back on it, and you have some great insight, what do you think the sequence of events and the sequence of cover-up was in order to, come to this, the pilot was suicidal and wanted to go crash?
Yeah, the pilot suicide thing is complete nonsense. There's literally no evidence whatsoever that this was anything done by the pilot. He was actually ruled out by all the officials. Like I said, there's no evidence. They say that this simulator route that he had planned, it is actually just MH370 to Jeddah from Kuala Lumpur that the media ran with as somehow being some kind of suicide route. I've actually got a graphic that will show all the MH370, 8 different people that flew that route. Exactly matches the simulator data, which he was also scheduled to fly that route. Everybody stuck up for him. The officials, the wife, family, coworkers. Guy was mentally health sound. The flight path contradicts a suicide narrative as well. You would just crash the plane right away. You wouldn't be going on this 8-hour joyride, wherever they claim. So I just want to let me do a quick recap of what I think happened with the flight path. This plane takes off from Kuala Lumpur, goes northeast towards Beijing, and they say when it gets to this weak point between radars in the South China Sea, it goes dark. Well, it turns out this is where a lithium-ion battery fire occurred. There was at least 500 pounds of dangerous lithium-ion batteries in the cargo bay, which have been banned and outlawed from passenger planes in the years following. In fact, if you go to the mail office or try to check a bag, they ask you if there's any lithium-ion batteries. So 500 pounds, we found 2 pallets of them. Looking at the ATSB report, were stacked up dangerously in the forward cargo bay right next to the electronics bay, which is exactly where you don't want them if you want to make sure your plane doesn't go dark. They ignite at this point, and we know they ignite here because we have a witness. We have Mike McKay on an oil rig that sees the plane on fire at the exact same moment the plane goes dark. We have 9 witnesses along the coast, up and down the coast of Malaysia and Thailand. They hear loud noises the exact same time because they're hearing these batteries go off. And then we have the plane turns around. It was recently admitted that some of these other experts that are out there looked at the radar and they were able to determine that the plane did an emergency descent when it turned around manually. And it was manually turned around because fire goes off, pilot's going to turn around, goes back to the nearest airport that you can go to land a Boeing 777, Penang. So he's going to the nearest airport. He's descending because he's not trying to kill all the passengers or lock out the people or any of this other nonsense that these narratives that they come up with. But it's because he's trying to give oxygen to the passengers to be able to breathe. That's why they're descending. Because in a fire scenario, you have to depressurize because the fire extinguishing devices suck oxygen out of the airplane. And that's what the Halon 1301 does. The lithium-ion batteries will not completely destroy the plane, at least not immediately. After a few hours, probably. The fire extinguishing devices can last for up to 3 hours. We've looked that up. You can look it up yourselves. And so what happens here is this plane then, after 10 minutes, it is seen by 8 fishermen off the coast of Malaysia and Thailand, flying very low, which corroborates what we've been able to determine now from the radar pings. In fact, there was another communication that was heard by another Boeing 777 pilot who didn't want to be named because they didn't want their life ruined, like Mike McKay's life was ruined for seeing the plane. And he heard them. So we know that there was communication as well. The last communication was not "Good night, MH370." And we know that for a fact because the Malaysian Minister of Defense, in a interview he did with Four Corners, an Australian broadcaster, 7 weeks later, said that the military did not send up jets to track the plane because they knew the plane was civilian and not hostile. The only way you could know that and that it wasn't hijacked is if you had communication. Simple as that. And then it goes over Penang. We've now speculated the reason why it didn't land is because it had 8 hours of fuel in it and it was overweight and potentially could not dump the fuel because there was no power. So now a situation where we're in a desperate scenario where the plane's pretty much doomed. The next thing they're supposed to do is go try to land on the water. But to land in the water, you need to have people around you. You need to have, people nearby to fish you out. Well, good news. The Cope Tiger and Cobra Gold exercises between the United States and Thailand were going on in the Andaman Sea the month prior, and the newest exercise, the Cope Tiger, were about to start up the next day. And the theme of those exercises was search and rescue. What a convenient opportunity. So this plane then deviates northwest, which again, if this is a suicidal pilot, you're just flying right over Indonesia into the South Indian Ocean. You're not going northwest and around the islands of Indonesia. It makes no sense. And then we have our last witness, Catherine T. So she's in the Nicobar Islands. She's on a boat. She's headed to Phuket, Thailand. And she sees a glowing orange plane flying low, descending with smoke coming out of the back of it. It's glowing orange because the Halon 1301 fire extinguishing gas has bromine in it. And a chemical reaction is releasing bromine, which is a halogen gas. Go look up halogen lamp. It looks exactly like what her sighting is. She didn't imagine seeing a glowing orange plane with no navigation lights. She saw it. She's in the agreed upon location where everybody says the plane flew over. And we only know that, months and years later. The coordinates indicate like right now near her location when we look at the satellite video. Again, those coordinates could not be deduced until at least May 28th, 9 days after these videos came out, which in my mind absolutely proves the videos must be real. But then we also have our drone. So the question here is people say, they think it's aliens. This is not aliens we're looking at in these videos, guys. There's no little people or aliens inside these orbs. These orbs are moving way too accurately and specifically. It's clear that they have some kind of purpose. And when we map out their rotation, it's a perfect equilateral triangle, and they're creating a perfect sine wave pattern, which is consistent with electrical engineering, a 3-phase electrical engineering 0-point system. This 0-point system has been speculated, even going all the way back to 1985 with Thomas Bearden, that this is some kind of pump wave conjugation event where they are producing a scalar potential, which is essentially the equivalent of gravity wave. And then what they're doing here is either some type of macroscopic phase conjugation to this plane, warping it from one location to the other, or just a straight up wormhole. And there's only a slight difference between the two of those. We know this is the United States implicated because they're filming it on 2 assets, and you can tell from the drone that it's an operation. People that are in the military that look at that drone video, it flies right underneath the wake of the plane. It's like right next to the plane as well, which is very, very close. And when the drone operator zooms in manually and tries to track the plane, where you can see the natural delay from latency due to how far away the person operating the camera is, they're trying to keep the plane in view and they can barely do it, but they zoom in like right before the event happens. And then they zoom back out like right before the zap goes off because they're trying to collect as much information about this event as possible. I don't think this was an experiment. I think that they've done this maybe before, but maybe not on an airliner like this. And they were trying to get as much information as possible. So one last thing, and then I'll let you ask more questions, is that the location here is the same location where this narrative says that this plane turned into the South Indian Ocean and then went on 5-hour joyride. But when you look at the raw data for that, you'll find that at 1840, which is when we think this plane is here, where Catherine T sees the Nicobar Islands, The data after that, all of a sudden, just becomes 10 rows on an Excel spreadsheet for the next 5 hours. The data before that is hundreds of rows of data. So there's a weird anomaly right at that location.
So we just absorbed a lot here.
Yeah.
So I got a couple of points. A couple of the fellas and bros listening right now, they probably haven't like, there's a lot of information. We just got to cut some stuff down. So first thing, sure. The lithium batteries that are on pallets, is that just, transporting goods for no, Occam's razor? Just they were trying to transport the goods as fast as they can. Beijing needed a bunch of these lithium batteries for a factory. This was just the easiest way to do them. They knew it was dangerous, but they've gotten away with stuff like that time and time again, just like lack of regulation in this part of the world. Is there any specific, bad, intentions by having these on the plane?
I mean, I think you could argue that somebody put those batteries on the plane to ignite them at the specific location between the radar points. That would take the longest response time possible to divert the plane away from China and back over to the west, potentially to this area where we think the plane's at. So either it's an accidental fire, because these things are incredibly dangerous. They missed 2 security screenings. The Malaysian Airlines CEO lies on March 13th, says there's no dangerous cargo on the plane. And then March 20th, after they've already invented this South Indian Ocean narrative, then comes out and says, oh yeah, by the way, 500 pounds of dangerous lithium ion batteries, a couple stacks of it in the forward cargo bay next to the main equipment center. And turns out as well that they missed 2 security screenings. But, why do you lie about that? Because the answer is, if you tell people that on March 8th and March 9th, when the plane disappears, everybody's going to immediately say that this was a fire event, like obviously an emergency fire event. The flight path indicates it. Everything indicates that's the scenario.
Now, let's go back to the military exercise that was occurring in the area where the fire sort of started and where they were trying to land in the ocean, and there would have been search and rescue teams around there.
Yeah.
Could you explain a little background of what exactly that military exercise was, and how exactly you think it's connected to sort of bad intentions and, the U.S. government wanting to basically disappear this plane?
Well, the first thing we have to realize is that we have to prove the lie. We have to prove the United States government knows what happened to this plane. And I think we can do that. First of all, you've got exercises going on right there in the location where this plane is a rogue 777 flying right past. There's no way. You've got your exercises going on. You've got all your military assets, your highest quality, technology. And we're just letting a Boeing 777 the size of a city block fly on past us. Like, we know what happened. Plus, we have USA 229, which is a naval ocean surveillance spy satellite. We looked at all the satellites in the whole world. And we were able to map their trajectories based on amateur historical, very accurate stuff that's on the internet. You guys can do it yourself and double check. We actually had it peer reviewed by 2 different people. And it's sitting there in the Malacca Straits, looking straight down with a sister satellite right next to it, capable of taking 3D stereoscopic imagery, staring right at our coordinates. So this plane flies past it. We've got Cobra Gold exercises started early February, and they ended I think maybe that day. And then the Cope Tiger exercises, basically it's the one starts and then the next one starts right after. I think it was meant to start March 10th. So this is important because we've got all the assets we need in the area. And I've FOIA'd the Navy to say, give me a list of the assets that were part of that exercise. They emailed back and said they can't tell me how many, but maybe they can tell me which one or whatever. Matthias Chang was the advisor to Prime Minister Mahathir, which was the prime minister before Najib, Najib was the one who went on and said this plane ended in the South Indian Ocean. Well, he's also one of the most corrupt people on the face of the planet. The 1MDB scandal, where he was caught with $700 million in his bank account, that's that minister. He was replaced again by Mahathir. Matthias Chang says that he knows what happened and that the Malaysian government was given secret information upon that they could never reveal it by accepting it, and that he told alternative podcasters that whatever happened to this plane was so huge that it would change geopolitics and the economy forever. So that's, I think, some of the background around and the one thing is I want to say is that we found that Cyber system that I just mentioned. So we know they're scanning the Earth all the time. There's no way they didn't detect a plane flying for 8 hours going rogue. But the SOSA system, sound surveillance system, it's been out there for maybe 50, 70 years, can pinpoint even that tiny Titan sub that imploded by the Titanic
Oh, wow,
last
yeah.
year, this thing 100% would have pinpointed the exact crash location of the plane. There was 2 acoustic detectors, one on Diego Garcia, one in Western Australia, right near the location they claimed this plane crashed. And then also we have radar as well, which radar is not limited to line of sight. Over the horizon radar can see for thousands of miles. And the JORN system, which is Jindalee Operational Radar Network, which is Australia's very powerful radar, could have detected this plane, as well as Pine Gap military base, one of the most secretive military bases in Australia, and Diego Garcia. Almost beyond any doubt, all 3 of them would have been able to track the plane on radar from takeoff to wherever it ended up. So we know the United States government, beyond any doubt, knows what happened to this plane.
So why would they try to disappear this plane?
Yeah, good question. And that's what the thing a lot of people ask me. So why are they doing this? The answer is semiconductors. There was 20 Freescale semiconductor employees and engineers on board this plane. They were all sitting next to each other. A couple of them had their whole families with them. 8 of them are Chinese nationals. 12 of them are Malaysian nationals. They work for an American company. The number one target for intellectual property espionage theft is foreign nationals that work for American companies. China steals roughly $600 billion worth per year. The things that I've learned from talking to like Navy engineer Salvatore Paez, who has literally high frequency gravitational wave generator patent, my buddy Dave Rossi, who's a DoD contractor as well, my other friend Bob Grenier, who does low energy nuclear reactions, is that you need coherent matter waves, which is something that these small transistors and transducers can produce. And superconductivity is one of the main byproducts of this type of technology that leads to these anti-gravitational effects. So we look into this company and we find out that they're linked to a National Security Agency report from 2005 that talks about the commercial emergence of superconductive microchips, and that the U.S. government needs to get involved in funding them. And if they do, that the technology could be available by 2010 or 2012. That same report as well mentions that these technologies are used in very advanced stuff like AI and quantum computers. And then we also found out, and I have it up probably in the background here somewhere, that they had recently signed a contract with U.S. Aerospace and Defense to serve RF power needs, radio frequency power needs. Well, it turns out the way that you can change an electromagnetic wave into a scalar potential, a gravitational wave, is through radio frequencies. There's a clip that I'm going to post later today about that. So if you guys are watching this, you can go back to my history on Twitter and you can take a look at it. So it seems like these people on board this plane were directly tied to the technology that was used on the plane. They may have been going to China with that technology. And you can imagine that the technology we see here is so paradigm shifting. Whoever controls this tech controls the whole planet, full military supremacy. Nukes mean nothing in the face of this tech. You know, you can warp a nuke back onto somebody. You could potentially annihilate a nuke with something like this.
Now, really quickly, this technology you're talking about, is this the same type of technology that could cause gravitational manipulation to explain how the propulsion systems on some of these UFOs work?
Yeah. And so just from the experts that I've talked to, the engineers, there's so many different aspects of this technology. And this is why it's just a Pandora's box. This is why they can't reveal any of it. This is why, in my opinion, the whole UFO disclosure phenomenon is just a big ruse. They want everybody looking at aliens and crash retrievals and not looking at technology, because once you figure out how the technology works, which is hidden in plain sight, Thomas Bearden's been talking about for 38 years, scalar physics, scalar potentials, everything opens up. We can have force fields, we can have cloaking devices, we can create these anti-gravitational effects, literally like teleportation, quote unquote, like warp drive, the ability to bend space-time, maybe even create a wormhole. We can have cold fusion. We can have the sun in the palm of our hands due to extremely powerful magnetic fields. We can potentially create just straight up free energy, like a device where you can plug it in, it starts running, you unplug it, and it can just power your whole house forever, you know, like something like that. And then we can even get to things like, yeah. And one more thing I want to say though, is that this can also produce doomsday weapons. And this is why it becomes a national security issue. It's not just teleporting a plane. We're talking like, if you read Salvatore Paez's high frequency gravitational wave generator, he pretty much talks about all those things I just listed. But then he says you can amplify energy to such a degree where you could destroy a planetoid or asteroid. And he's being a little bit coy there because it's just a matter of scaling it up. And now you've got a weapon that can, like the Death Star, you know, just blow up like a whole planet, blow up a whole sun, maybe even create a Big Bang. And this is why I think they're hiding it, because I think that the powers that be, in their minds, is noble reasons. They say, if we give this to people, if China, Russia, if everybody has this, Iran, if ISIS terrorists get this technology, how long is this planet going to last? Not very long. This is magnitudes more powerful than nuclear weapons.